The Hiramic Legend by Manly P. Hall. Secret Teachings of All Ages, page 234. Then Solomon, the beloved of God, builder of the everlasting house, and Grand Master of the Lodge of Jerusalem, ascended the throne of his father David. He consecrated his life to the erection of a temple to God and a palace for the kings of Israel. David's faithful friend Hiram, king of Tyre, hearing that a son of David sat upon the throne of Israel, sent messages of congratulations and offers of assistance to the new ruler. In his History of the Jews, Josephus mentions that copies of the letters passing between the two kings were then to be seen both at Jerusalem and at Tyre. Despite Hiram's lack of appreciation for the 20 cities of Galilee, which Solomon presented to him upon the completion of the temple, the two monarchs remained the best of friends. Both were famous for their wit and wisdom, and when they exchanged letters, each devised puzzling questions to test the mental ingenuity of the other. Solomon made an agreement with Hiram of Tyre, promising vast amounts of barley, wheat, corn, wine, and oil as wages for the masons and carpenters from Tyre who were to assist the Jews in the erection of the temple. Hiram also supplied cedars and other fine trees, which were made into rafts and floated down the sea to Joppa, whence they were taken inland by Solomon's workmen to the temple site. Because of his great love for Solomon, Hiram of Tyre sent also the Grand Master of the Dionysiac architects, C. Hiram Abiff, a widow's son, who had no equal amount the craftsman of the earth. C. Hiram is described as being a Tyrian by birth, but of Israelitish descent, and a second Bezaleel, honored by his king with the title of father. The Freemason's Pocket Companion, published in 1771, describes C. Hiram as the most cunning, skillful, and curious workman that ever lived, whose abilities were not confined to building alone, but extended to all kinds of work, whether in gold, silver, brass, or iron, whether in linen, tapestry, or embroidery, whether considered as an architect, statuary founder, or designer, separately or together, he equally excelled. From his designs and under his direction, all the rich and splendid furniture of the temple and its several appendages were begun, carried on, and finished. Solomon appointed him in his absence to fill the chair as Deputy Grand Master, and in his presence, Senior Grand Warden, Master of Work, and General Overseer of all artists, as well as those whom David had formerly procured from Tyre and Sidon, and as those Hiram should now send. Although an immense amount of labor was involved in its construction, Solomon's Temple, in the words of George Oliver, was only a small building and very inferior in point of size to some of our churches. The number of buildings contiguous to it and the vast treasure of gold and precious stones used in its construction concentrated a great amount of wealth within the temple area. In the midst of the temple stood the Holy of Holies, sometimes called the Oracle. It was an exact cube, each dimension being 20 cubits, and exemplified the influence of Egyptian symbolism. The buildings of the temple group were ornamented with 1,453 columns of Parian marble, magnificently sculptured, and 2,906 pilasters decorated with capitals. There was a broad porch facing the east, and the Sanctum Sanctorum was upon the west. According to tradition, the various buildings and courtyards could hold in all 300,000 persons. Both the sanctuary and the Holy of Holies were entirely lined with solid gold plates encrusted with jewels. King Solomon began the building of the temple in the 4th year of his reign on what would be, according to modern calculation, the 21st day of April, and finished it in the 11th year of his reign on the 23rd day of October. The temple was begun in the 480th year after the children of Israel had passed the Red Sea. Part of the labor of construction included the building of an artificial foundation on the brow of Mount Moriah. The stones for the temple were hoisted from quarries directly beneath Mount Moriah, and were trued before being brought to the surface. The brass and golden ornaments for the temple were cast in molds in the clay ground between Succoth and Zeradatha, and the wooden parts were all finished before they reached the temple site. The building was put together consequently without sound and without instruments, all its parts fitting exactly without the hammer of contention, the axe of division, or any tool of mischief. Anderson's much-discussed Constitutions of the Freemasons, published in London in 1723 and reprinted by Benjamin Franklin in Philadelphia in 1734, thus describes the division of the laborers engaged in the building of the everlasting house. But Dagon's temple and the finest structures of Tyre and Sidon could not be compared with the eternal God's temple at Jerusalem. They were employed about in no less than 3,600 princes, or master masons, to conduct the work according to Solomon's directions, with 80,000 hewers of stone in the mountain, or fellow craftsmen, and 70,000 laborers, in all 153,600 besides the levy, under Adoniram, to work in the mountains of Lebanon by turns with the Sidonians, viz. 30,000, being in all 183,600. Daniel Sickles gives 3,300 or 3,300 overseers instead of 3,600, and lists the three Grand Masters separately. The same author estimates the cost of the temple at nearly 4,000 millions of dollars. The Masonic legend of the building of Solomon's temple does not in every particular parallel the scriptural version, especially in those portions relating to see Hiram Abiff. According to the biblical account, this master workman returned to his own country. In the Masonic allegory, he is foully murdered. On this point, A.E. Wyatt, in his new Encyclopedia of Freemasonry, makes the following explanatory comment. The legend of the master builder is the great allegory of Masonry. It happens that his figurative story is grounded on the fact of a personality mentioned in Holy Scripture, but this historical background is of the accidents and not the essence. The significance is in the allegory, and not in any point of history which may lie behind it. Unquote. C. Hiram, as master of the builders, divided his workmen into three groups, which were termed entered apprentices, fellow craftsmen, and master masons. To each division he gave certain passwords and signs by which their respective excellence could be quickly determined. While all were classified according to their merits, some were dissatisfied, for they desired a more exalted position than they were capable of filling. At last, three fellow craftsmen, more daring than their companions, determined to force C. Hiram to reveal to them the password of the master's degree. Knowing that C. Hiram always went into the unfinished Sanctum Sanctorum at high noon to pray, these ruffians, whose names were Jubello, and Jubellum, lay in wait for him, one at each of the main gates of the temple. C. Hiram, about to leave the temple by the south gate, was suddenly confronted by Jubella, armed with a 24-inch gauge. Upon C. Hiram's refusal to reveal the master's word, the ruffian struck him on the throat with the rule, and the wounded master then hastened to the west gate, where Jubello, armed with a square, awaited him and made a similar demand. Again C. Hiram was silent, and the second assassin struck him on the breast with the square. C. Hiram thereupon staggered to the east gate, only to be met there by Jubellum, armed with a maul. When C. Hiram refused him the master's word, Jubellum struck the master between the eyes with the mallet, and C. Hiram fell dead. The body of C. Hiram was buried by the murderers over the brow of Mount Moriah, and a sprig of acacia placed upon the grave. The murderers then sought to escape punishment for their crime by embarking for Ethiopia, but the port was closed. All three were finally captured, and after admitting their guilt, were duly executed. Parties of three were then sent out by King Solomon, and one of these groups discovered the newly made grave marked by the evergreen sprig. After the entered apprentices and fellow craftsmen had failed to resurrect their master from the dead, he was finally raised by the master masons with the strong grip of a lion's paw. To the initiated builder, the name Si Hiram Abiff signifies my Father, the universal spirit, one in essence, three in aspect. Thus, the murdered master is a type of the cosmic martyr, the crucified spirit of good, the dying God, whose mystery is celebrated throughout the world. Among the manuscripts of Dr. Sigismund Backstrom, the initiated Rosicrucian, appears the following extract from von Welling concerning the true philosophic nature of the Masonic Si Hiram. Quote, the original word, Si Hiram, is a radical word consisting of three consonants, Cheth, Resh, and Mem. Cheth signifies Chema, the sun's light, the universal, invisible, cold fire of nature, attracted by the sun, manifested into light and sent down to us and to every planetary body belonging to the solar system. 2. Resh signifies Ruach, i.e., spirit, air, wind, as being the vehicle which conveys and collects the light into the numberless phoci, wherein the solar rays of light are agitated by a circular motion and manifested in heat and burning fire. 3. Mem, or Mem, signifies Majim, water, humidity, but rather the mother of water, radical humidity, or a particular kind of condensed air. These three constitute the universal agent or fire of nature in one word, Si Hiram, not Hiram. Albert Pike mentions several forms of the name Si Hiram, K Hiram, and K Herm, and Ker Om. The latter ending in the sacred Hindu monosyllable Om, which may also be extracted from the names of the three murderers. Pike further relates the three ruffians to a triad of stars in the constellation of Libra, and also calls attention to the fact that the Chaldean god Baal, metamorphosed into a demon by the Jews, appears in the name of each of the murderers: Jubela, Jubelo, and Jubilum, or Jubelum. The Chaldean god Baalis is a me here. That's what that's meant. I'm assuming it's. Baal has usually two A's as you read in the Bible. He's spelling it here with one A, so I was like Baal or whatever. But I think he's meaning Baal. Interesting how he says that each of the murderers, Jubela, Jubelo, and Jubelum, has that name appearing, right? Bel, and Bel. To interpret the Hiramic legend requires familiarity with both the Pythagorean and Kabbalistic systems of numbers and letters, and also the philosophic and astronomic cycles of the Egyptians, Chaldeans, and Brahmins. For example, consider the number 33. The first temple of Solomon stood for 33 years in its pristine splendor. At the end of that time, it was pillaged by the Egyptian king Shishak, and finally, in 588 BC, it was completely destroyed by Nebuchadnezzar and the people of Jerusalem, who were led into captivity to Babylon. Also, King David ruled for 33 years in Jerusalem. The Masonic order is divided into 33 symbolic degrees. There are 33 segments in the human spinal column, and Jesus was crucified in the 33rd year of his life. The efforts made to discover the origin of the Hiramic legend show that while the legend in its present form is comparatively modern, its underlying principles run back to remotest antiquity. It is generally admitted by modern Masonic scholars that the story of the martyred Si Hiram is based upon the Egyptian rites of Osiris, whose death and resurrection figuratively portrayed the spiritual death of man and his regeneration through initiation into the mysteries. Si Hiram is also identified with Hermes through the inscription on the emerald tablet. From these associations, it is evident that Si Hiram is to be considered as a prototype of humanity. In fact, he is Plato's archetype of man. As Adam after the fall symbolizes the idea of human degeneration, so Si Hiram, through his resurrection, symbolizes the idea of human regeneration. On the 19th day of March 1314, Jacques de Molay, the last Grand Master of the Knights Templars, was burned on a pyre erected upon that point of the islet of the Seine at Paris, where afterwards was erected the statue of King Henry VI. I'm sorry, my bad. King Henry IV. See The Indian Religions by Hargrave Jennings. It is mentioned as a tradition in some of the accounts of the burning, writes Hargrave Jennings, that de Molay, ere he expired, summoned Clement, the Pope, who had pronounced the bull of abolition against the order and had condemned the Grand Master to the flames, to appear within 40 days before the supreme eternal judge, and Philip the king to the same awful tribunal within the space of a year. Both predictions were fulfilled. The close relationship between Freemasonry and the original Knights Templars has caused the story of C. Hiram to be linked with the martyrdom of Jacques de Molay. According to this interpretation, the three ruffians who cruelly slew their master at the gates of the temple because he refused to reveal the secrets of his order represent the Pope, the King, and the executioners. De Molay died maintaining his innocence and refusing to disclose the philosophical and magical arcana of the Templars. Those who have sought to identify C. Hiram with the murdered King Charles I conceived the Hiramic legend to have been invented for that purpose by Elias Ashmole, a mystical philosopher who was probably a member of the Rosicrucian fraternity. Charles was dethroned in 1647 and died on the block in 1649, leaving the Royalist Party leaderless. An attempt has been made to relate the term the Sons of the Widow, an appellation frequently applied to members of the Masonic order, to this incident in English history, for by the murder of her king England became a widow, and all Englishmen widows' sons. To the mystic Christian Mason, C. Hiram represents the Christ who in 3 degrees raised the temple of his body from its earthly sepulchre. His three murderers were Caesar's agent, the state, the Sanhedrin, the church, and the incited populace, the mob. Thus considered, C. Hiram becomes the higher nature of man, and their murderers are ignorance, superstition, and fear. He's not the only Mason here that mentions those three words. My last one I read to you from the Masonic World.com article, talking about the similar subject, whatever, he mentions them three words, ignorance, superstition, and fear, so these obviously have high important meaning to Masons, and so the indwelling Christ can give expression to himself in this world only through man's thoughts, feelings, and actions. Right thinking, right feeling, and right action. These are three gates through which the Christ's power passes into the material world. They are to labor in the erection of the Temple of Universal Brotherhood. And we know what that Temple of Universal Brotherhood is, so we need to go through that with those who are learned in this language of these guys. Temple of Universal Brotherhood is another name basically for this coming utopia. Ignorance, superstition, and fear are three ruffians through whose agencies the spirit of good is murdered in a false kingdom controlled by wrong thinking, wrong feeling, or wrong action, established in its stead. In the material universe, evil appears ever victorious. In this sense, writes Daniel Sickles, the myth of the Tyrian is perpetually repeated in the history of human affairs. Orpheus was murdered and his body thrown into the Hebrus. Socrates was made to drink the hemlock, and in all ages we have seen evil temporarily triumphant, and virtue and truth calumniated, persecuted, crucified, and slain. But eternal justice marches surely and swiftly through the world. The Typhons, the children of darkness, the plotters of crime, all infinitely varied forms of evil, are swept into oblivion. And truth and virtue, for a time laid low, come forth, clothed with diviner majesty and crowned with everlasting glory. If, as there is ample reason to suspect, the modern Freemasonic order was profoundly influenced by, if it is not an actual outgrowth of, Francis Bacon's secret society, its symbolism is undoubtedly permeated with Bacon's two great ideals, universal education and universal democracy. That is another code word for New World Order, by the way. The deadly enemies of universal education are ignorance, superstition, and fear, by which the human soul is held in bondage to the lowest part of its constitution. The errant enemies of universal democracy have ever been the crown, the tiara, and the torch. Thus, C. Hiram symbolizes that ideal state of spiritual, intellectual, and physical emancipation which has ever been sacrificed upon the altar of human selfishness. See, Hiram is the beautifier of the eternal house. Modern utilitarianism, however, sacrifices the beautiful for the practical, in the same breath declaring the obvious lie that selfishness, hatred, and discord are practical. Dr. Orville Ward Owen found a considerable part of the first 32 degrees of Freemasonic ritualism hidden in the text of the first Shakespeare folio. Masonic emblems are to be observed also upon the title pages of nearly every book published by Bacon. Sir Francis Bacon considered himself as a living sacrifice upon the altar of human need. He was obviously cut down in the midst of his labors, and no student of his New Atlantis can fail to recognize the Masonic symbolism contained therein. According to the observations of Joseph Fort Newton, the Temple of Solomon described by Bacon in that utopian romance was not a house at all, but the name of an ideal state. So there you go, the ideal state being universal brotherhood, universal democracy, collectivist world government, New World Order. Is it not true that the Temple of Freemasonry is also emblematic of a condition of society? While, as before stated, the principles of the Hiramic legend are of greatest antiquity, it is not impossible that its present form may be based upon incidents in the life of Lord Bacon, who passed through the philosophic death and was raised in Germany. In an old manuscript appears the statement that the Freemasonic order was formed by alchemists and Hermetic philosophers who had banded themselves together to protect their secrets against the infamous methods used by avaricious persons to wring from them the secret of gold making. The fact that the Hiramic legend contains an alchemical formula gives credence to this story. Thus, the building of Solomon's temple represents the consummation of the magnum opus, or the great work, I added that, which cannot be realized without the assistance of C. Hiram, the universal agent. The Masonic mysteries teach the initiate how to prepare within his own soul a miraculous powder of projection by which it is possible for him to transmute the base lump of human ignorance, perversion, and discord into an ingot of spiritual and philosophic gold. Sufficient similarity exists between the Masonic C. Hiram and the Kundalini of Hindu mysticism to warrant the assumption that C. Hiram may be considered a symbol also of the spirit fire moving through the sixth ventricle of the spinal column. The exact science in human regeneration is the lost key of Masonry, for when the spirit fire is lifted up through the 33 degrees or segments of the spinal column and enters into the domed chamber of the human skull, it finally passes into the pituitary body, Isis, where it evokes Ra, the pineal gland, and demands the sacred name. Operative Masonry, in the fullest meaning of that term, signifies the process by which the eye of Horus is opened. E.A. Wallace Budge has noted that in some of the papyri illustrating the entrance of the souls of the dead into the judgment hall of Osiris, the deceased person has a pine cone attached to the crown of his head. The Greek mysteries also carried a symbolic staff, the upper end being in the form of a pine cone, which was called the Thyrsus of Bacchus. In the human brain, there is a tiny gland called the pineal body, which is the sacred eye of the ancients and corresponds to the third eye of the Cyclops. Little is known concerning the function of the pineal body, which Descartes suggested, more wisely than he knew, might be the abode of the spirit of man. As its name signifies, the pineal gland is the sacred pine cone in man, the eye single which cannot be opened until C. Hiram, the spirit fire, is raised to the sacred seals which are called the seven churches in Asia. There is an oriental painting which shows three sunbursts. One sunburst covers the head, in the midst of which sits Brahma with four heads, his body a mysterious dark color. The second sunburst, which covers the heart, solar plexus, and upper abdominal region, shows Vishnu, sitting in the blossom of the lotus on a couch formed of the coils of the serpent of cosmic motion, its seven-hooded head forming a canopy over the god. The third sunburst is over the generative system, in the midst of which sits Shiva, his body a grayish-white, and the Ganges River flowing out of the crown of his head. This painting was the work of a Hindu mystic who spent many years subtly concealing great philosophical principles within these figures. The Christian legends could be related also to the human body by the same method as the Oriental, for the arcane meanings hidden in the teachings of both schools are identical. As applied to masonry, the three sunbursts represent the gates of the temple at which Hiramic was struck, there being no gate in the north because the sun never shines from the northern angle of the heavens. The north is the symbol of the physical because of its relation to ice, crystallized water, and to the body of crystallized spirit. In man, the light shines towards the north but never from it, because the body has no light of its own but shines with the reflected glory of the divine life particles concealed within physical substance. For this reason, the moon is accepted as a symbol of man's physical nature. Hiramic is the mysterious, fiery, airy water which must be raised through the three grand centers symbolized by the ladder, with three rungs, and the sunburst flowers mentioned in the descriptions of the Hindu painting. It must also pass upward by means of the ladder of 7 rungs. The 7 plexuses proximate to the spine. The 9 segments of the sacrum and coccyx are pierced by 10 foramina, through which pass the roots of the tree of life. 9 is the sacred number of man, and in the symbolism of the sacrum and coccyx, a great mystery is concealed. That part of the body from the kidneys downward was termed by the early Kabbalists the land of Egypt, into which the children of Israel were taken during the captivity. Out of Egypt, Moses, the illumined mind, as his name implies, led the tribes of Israel, the 12 faculties, by raising the brazen serpent in the wilderness upon the symbol of the Tau cross. Not only Hiramic, but the god-men of nearly every pagan mystery ritual are personifications of the spirit fire in the human spinal cord. The astronomical aspect of the Hiramic legend must not be overlooked. The tragedy of Hiramic is enacted annually by the sun during its passage through the signs of the zodiac. From the journey of the sun through the 12 signs, writes Albert Pike, come the legend of the 12 labors of Hercules, the incarnations of Vishnu and Buddha. Hence came the legend of the murder of Hiramic, representative of the sun, by the 3 fellow crafts, symbols of the winter signs, Capricornus, Aquarius, and Pisces, who assailed him at the 3 gates of heaven and slew him at the winter solstice. Hence the search for him by the 9 fellow crafts, the other 9 signs, his finding, burial, and resurrection. See Morals and Dogma. And I will continue with part 2 of this, which won't be that long, I don't think. All right.